Alrighty, so for week 13, we are making a major shift in the course. Okay, so this is after the Dev 1, and in this section, we're going to cover objects and functions. And what we had done before, which is to set up objects, are object literals, right? And writing methods inside of objects is like the basic way to do it. And so now we're going to be introduced to two different ways to handle object oriented programming. So some students, if they come from a classical programming background, think when we set up these objects with methods, that was the classical, what we call OOP programming. But it really wasn't. And now we are going to get introduced to that. And first, we'll use what's called a constructor function to create class instantiated objects. And you'll hear this, and the first time I heard it, it was like a what? It's basically like you're using a template to create a new object, and that object will have methods on it, but they'll look different a little bit than what we saw before, but it is kind of the same. But it's a more sophisticated structure. But what will happen is we'll learn it through learning constructor functions to create OOP or instantiated objects. And then here, and this will be next week, we'll switch and have create instantiated objects, but using a different syntax. Okay. It's going to be everything you learn. And he does it in a way through this hangman game that is not completely, if I'm completely honest, not my favorite, but I still think it illustrates the idea very well of how to set up these first constructor functions, and then he'll convert it into a class. So this is a really this is often where classical trained programmers or developers think this is where you start, because in many programming languages like Java, you start with object oriented your first time, your first day out. But in this case, we're starting them later now that we've learned the basic JavaScript and we've learned how to handle the browser. Okay, so I just want to have a context because there's really only two major subjects we're going to finish with these this function construction the constructor functions, I can say it, and classes. You just really can think of them as classes from here on out, and asynchronous. And this is such an important topic, and both of them really are. But I would say of the two, this is the most important. But this is something you want to know how to do, okay, and understand how to set up. So what I want to say though, kind of coming back to here in the attendance for this week, what I've done is I've given you the Dev 2, the last Dev requirements for the class. So in this case, you're going to have options. Okay, so here's the options. Your options is you can take your Dev 1, right, and refactor it using a class implementation, right? Your outputs need to be handled. You can do all, and actually, even the update could be done. But what happens is with local storage and using a class implementation, it doesn't work very well. It's really intended because we are using local storage like it's not really intended to be used, but we're getting the idea of persistent data. Really, this would be the update. Well, all of it would be handled out on this on a network server somewhere on a database concept, probably. So, anyway, this could be the one option, and we can talk more about this. Definitely come and talk to me about it. You still have to handle the validation, and I'll give you my example. I'll go over it later. I do have a suggestion if you take this route. The nice thing about taking this route is after we finish this section, these next 2 weeks, you could be working on your last dev. Okay, so that's one of the benefits. Okay. Now, the second option, oh, sorry, the suggestion was to use a class for the user input and use a different class for handling storage. Again, I'll go over my example later. The second option is to find an API, and this is really the last section I was talking about that will cover the thing that you really want to have a beginning experience and be able to call. Because think about everything we do these days, right? Think about all the applications that you use that are important to you have to hit the web in some way. So I think about maps, right? Maps is something I use almost all the time for my tracking my training. Well, the app that I use has to go out to Google Maps, right? Given a location, Latin along, we call it, and give me back either a direction or some kind of pacing or some kind of something. So, having the ability to understand how to call APIs and handle them, because the thing is, it's going to take time to do that. It takes time to make these network calls, and that's API is really advanced programming interfaces. Really, what you're doing is you're calling something, you're requesting data, you're running a function, but most of the time you're probably requesting data, and you're getting back your payload of your data in order to process into the browser. Now, this is if you've never heard of that, that's okay. That's what we'll learn in the second one. So for the second option, I'm just talking about this so you have this kind of in your mind, is that you find an API not used in the class, and you will see which ones we use. Andrew's Hangman or the JSON placeholder, which is the one we're going to learn, what one we'll use in our Learn Together, right? And you will implement this API using async, await, or promises, because we're going to end up learning kind of like what we're doing with the OOP, where we're learning constructor functions and then classes. Well, with APIs, we'll end up actually learning them three different ways, because there's three different ways to implement them. But ultimately, the way you want to know how to do it is either using async, await, or promises. And actually, they're related depending on how you write your code. So again, I'll give you an example of mine as we move further down. Now, the third option I have only had a couple of students take, but I wanted to give it to you, which is to make up your own Dev 2 and reach out to me. I've had some students actually take their Dev 1 and call an API to bring in data somehow into it. So we could talk about that as well. And actually, I should modify this. So, if you want to do this, you need to at least think through it. So I'll give you probably until the middle of November, given the timeline. Now, having said that, so anyway, that's the last dev, and I just want you to have a context that you understand that dev is. Now, when we look at the end of the semester, it comes up quick after dev one. Seems like it just for me when I look at it, it's like so amazingly quick. 93 this semester. Okay. So here we are in October. I roll forward through Thanksgiving, right? And really, it's right here. Our Dev 2 will be the 1st of December. And then that following week, so just like with all the devs, you have to turn it in here, but you'll have a week to complete a code review. Okay, so that's when it's coming up. So I really, for this week, wanted to just kind of set the tone for what we're going to be doing this week. I am in my office recording this today. I know I didn't have my video up earlier, but I've met many of you in dev code reviews, and it's been great. For some of you that chose the alternative, I'll have to think about how I'm going to handle that. I'll have an answer. You're welcome to come talk to me. I've already talked to a couple of you about that, so we'll have that to look forward to. Anyway, fun and exciting stuff to do. Hope you have a great one, and I'll talk to you soon.